What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an early look at the early access launch of Titan Quest II. This video should be going live right as the game itself becomes available in early access and is coinciding with the THQ showcase that was going on today. And that is possible because a few days ago, the developer and everything reached out and asked if I wanted to take a look at the early access launch, as I had previously been part of an early preview of Titan Quest II all the way back in March, which was just the prologue. So this obviously includes a lot more, basically the entirety of Act 1, lets you get more into the systems and everything. But as an early access launch, obviously there will be more to come, and we'll talk a little bit more about that stuff towards the end, as they did send over a lot of information via a sort of FAQ checklist that I thought had a lot of good information for those who are curious. But first, to talk about the game itself. So, Titan Quest II puts us at the center of a Diablo-like action RPG, inspired obviously by Greek mythology. So, in this specific instance, our character is being hounded by Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, for some unknown reason, and that, combined with just the general problems she has been causing across the realms, we have a lot of work to do to establish ourselves as somebody blessed by the gods, utilizing divine masteries to ultimately make up our class, alongside all of the other trappings of the genre, things like, of course, the infinite loot grind, big boss battles, and even some questing. So, to get the ball rolling, let's first talk about character creation. So right now, you can just pick a bunch of either male or female presets, but one of the early access updates they'll be working on is to implement a full character creator that should let you visually customize what your character looks like. But for the launch here, it does look like there will just be a basic preset selection until then. Another thing to mention, speaking of creating a character though, is that this game will fully support multiplayer with the early access launch even, which if there are any technical problems, I imagine is where people will run into them, given that in the time I spent with this game, a good 5 or 6 hours over the past day or two, I only had a single crash, and that was pretty much the only problem. Multiplayer though obviously makes things a lot more complicated and can be more prone to issues. That said, multiplayer was not actually available in this preview build, so I couldn't take a look at that personally, even if I had somebody to play with, so ultimately we shall see. But the other aspect of getting your run started is of course picking the difficulty. Now this does come with a few different options, essentially an easy, normal, hard selection on top of a couple of extra things as well. So for starters, hard or hardcore mode is in fact a single attempt mode, so if you die, that character is just permanently dead. You can also enable SSF or solo self-found. This means that you can only use gear that you personally have found. But the interesting thing is, this is actually not where difficulty stops. So once you get a certain ways into the game, you can actually start interacting with these ritual shrines. Ritual shrines both allow you to either respec all of your attribute points, which you need to do from these shrines. You can respec masteries and stuff, which we'll get into from their own menu. But the other thing you can do at these shrines is the rituals of Ares, which will let you do things like increase or decrease the difficulty of the monsters you are fighting. You can also do things like raise the level of enemies in previous areas if you want to run back through. You can also just respawn enemies generally outside of just a general play session. So rather than stopping and restarting, you can just respawn them from here. And believe it or not, there is actually a little more to this as well, because every time you defeat a significant boss, they will drop an item that, when brought to these shrines, enables you to then fight that boss again whenever you want. Turning those items in actually creates a shrine at that boss's arena that you can then just pay a small price to spawn the boss and fight it again for, shots at loot, just experience, that kind of thing. So if you even just want to practice a boss, you could do it this way. And I mention that specifically because while they will eventually have a proper in-game implemented, it looks like doing stuff like this is what will be in here currently as the early access launch goes. As far as what the eventual early in-game content will look like, it's probably going to be something to the tune of the usual things, basically repeatable experiences to find loot and of course strengthen your character, as can pretty much be expected. Moving on from there though, let's talk about some other things you can expect. So outside of just smashing enemies to bits with all the gear you'll be finding, progression largely comes down to leveling up, which is going to give you access to active and passive skill points. Early on in the game, you'll run into eventually 2 different shrines that give you access to divine masteries. Combining these two masteries makes ultimately what is going to be your class, and obviously they are meant to synergize with each other. Currently, this is Earth, Rogue, Storm, and Warrior, or Warfare. They will be adding more of these throughout early access. They have plans for quite a few more. This is what the game is launching with. Already, I enjoy mixing and matching these. Once you have access to them, what you can do is start earning divine points. So divine points are typically earned by, completing main story objectives, killing certain bosses, that kind of thing, and even a little bit from just leveling up. You spend these divine points to raise the rank of your two masteries. This will give you access to the later tiers of abilities and things. So for Warfare, this means like getting access to things like Leap. For the magic masteries, it's more about, obviously getting access to better and better spells. Now, each level, you can put points into the active as well as your passive abilities. Doing so will actually unlock nodes that you can then add modifiers to. So as a skill levels up, you can add more modifiers to it. For passives at certain milestones, you'll be able to add these nodes as well. So even your passives will get significant upgrades as you progress them. Now what this means is on top of unlocking specific skills that you want to use, you're also going to be able to customize how those skills work. So for the basic sweep attack, when you are playing the Warfare Mastery, you can actually slot in one of these nodes to turn it into a channeled whirlwind ability. Just fundamentally changing how it functions. There's also stuff to add like projectile damage. Now outside of your masteries, you also have core skills that you can increase too. This is things like making your basic attack stronger, which they've separated into one node for each weapon set you can equip, which means it's even possible to have an entirely different setup based on weapon swapping, theoretically. And then there's also things like your dodge and your barrier. So dodging and using your barrier are some of the primary forms of mitigation that are going to be available to everyone. People who wear certain types of armor, light or medium for instance, can do things like, have an easier time dodging with better recovery times because of the armor, but then you can also upgrade the actual ability via this menu, which can do things like reduce the cooldown on dodge. Barrier, as an example, on the other hand, just throws up a barrier based on a couple of different factors, but basically the more magic-oriented you are, the better the barrier is, and it's just a straight-up damage shield until it fades, and then it goes on a cooldown. Those are available, again, to everybody, and that stuff in combination with the way the masteries work is something I'm enjoying messing around with a lot. I'm actually really looking forward to when they start adding more masteries, some of which they've already talked about and detailed a little bit of what they had in mind. And that, combined with the fact that this is a game that will be available entirely single player, as an example, is the stuff I personally am particularly excited about. Still some other things to cover though, so at least in the beginning of the game here, some of these areas are huge. Like there is a lot to explore. There's a lot of little hidden stuff, there are dungeons and things to find, and there are even like side quests to get up to. So as you're moving through the world, you will actually encounter a whole bunch of people, towns, camps, things like that. They will have quests for you to go do, which then reward, things like extra attribute, mastery points, that kind of stuff. And I mention that because there does look to be a pretty good chunk of things to do that have very little to do with chasing down the main story, co-op or not. And it honestly makes just kind of running around the map they've built here pretty fun. I mean, so far I like what they're on to. Obviously we'll have to see how the later stuff gets along, but I am looking forward to it. Now there is the combat itself, obviously that's a big highlight here. The main thing I want to mention are a few things. One, combat, at least here in the beginning, is a little bit slower paced. In my own initial early preview, I mentioned that this is the kind of game that I think would feel a lot better once you started getting your movement abilities, which were a tier above what you had access to in that preview. Here, I did have access to those movement abilities, and I feel like I was right. This game gets a lot better once you can start moving more freely. But one thing I really enjoy about it is that for bosses in particular, they tend to have these really big, impactful attacks that you would be better off learning kind of the moveset, kind of what they're about to do, and then reacting accordingly, being that, like dodging or throwing up a barrier at the appropriate time, and it keeps you kind of engaged in a way that sometimes these games don't manage to do and can instead become kind of mindless clicking, and I didn't feel that was the case here. At least, currently, obviously. Ongoing, we'll see what happens. Sometimes these games start out that way, and then they very quickly turn into just, how fast can you go simulator, and, it doesn't matter what anything is doing. And personally, I like a little bit of that heavier back and forth. That said, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the masteries in particular shape up. But so far, I think they're absolutely moving in the right direction here. Now, I kind of want to start ending this video by answering a bunch of questions via the FAQ sheet that they gave me that I thought people might want to know. For starters, if you actually were part of the early preview or even the demo that they had out at one point, just so you know, they are going to have a WASD option, and there will be control schemes for using left click to do your basic attacks instead of right click, which is what it currently is, which can be a little awkward at first, but I got used to it and kind of wound up enjoying it, but nonetheless a good thing to know. So for starters, it looks like they'll be attempting to put out a big update for the game every 3 months or so while it's in early access. These are going to include things like the new masteries, the new chapters, the proper character creator, new gameplay features, a little vague on what that was supposed to mean. And then obviously they'll do like hot fixing and balancing between that, as the balancing especially is going to be a big part of the early access period. ARPGs are a kind of game where the details and the fine tune and the balancing really, really matter. But as this is a game that is in a space where people tend to, I would say, typically go the very online microtransaction heavy route, you may very well be happy, or at least I know I'm happy to know, that they're not doing any microtransactions. They might do expansion packs and DLC in the future. They're not obviously committing to that just yet. They may do it though. Otherwise though, there will be no microtransactions, anything like that at all, which I'm absolutely for. I think it's the right decision. And in combination with the fact that they are not trying to push this fully online, there is a completely single-player offline experience to be had here, makes it a huge win for me. I personally love to play these games by myself, and I think having those things tends to make that experience worse, or in some cases, they just don't give you a single-player option at all and have an always online requirement. Eventually, the game will be coming to consoles with the 1.0 release. It won't be available now, but it will eventually. Multiplayer co-op is something that should be available with the early access launch here, but there will be no PvP. They don't have any plans for implementing that. There will also not be any mounts or pets. That's something they decided to not deal with for things like pacing and traversal reasons. You can obviously fast travel to waypoints and whatnot. If you die, you drop a portal where you died, so you can quickly jump back into things if you want anyway. So it's not something that's like necessarily set in stone. Right now, they don't have the total number of masteries sorted out. They are still deciding on what the final 1.0 version, and then they may very well add some past that. They just haven't completely figured that out yet. Currently, the stash in the game is just like a basic stash system for each character. In the future, this is apparently going to be like a shared stash. They're a little light on details here, but just letting you know about it. Another update they have planned over the course of the early access is to add a transmog system as well, which is not currently in the game, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of these armors and all of the various like tiers of it look really cool, and it would be a shame to not be able to make yourself look cool. As for everything else, I think is going to come down to just the details of it. Like obviously with this being an ARPG, there's a big focus on things like itemization as an example, the actual balancing. I think all of that is going to evolve over the course of the early access period, which is why I didn't spend too much time on it here. But to sort of start bringing this video to a close, so far, at least for me and what I like to get out of these games, Titan Quest II has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed what I've seen here. It's obviously still early, there's a lot of game to go. If you don't want to be part of that iteration process, I would probably just hold off until it eventually launches into 1.0. But overall, I like the combat, I like the mastery and the progression systems, and I'm looking forward to seeing those get fleshed out. But I think as far as early access impressions go, that is pretty much where I am at with it. So hopefully you enjoyed that, got something out of it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, as I will surely keep you informed of this game's journey through early access. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.